Bom dia. Em primeiro lugar, quisiera agradecer a CEBRI por a invitação, dar-nos esta oportunidade de apresentar a nossa conclusão e o projeto African Economic Outlook. Em segundo lugar, quisiera pedir desculpa porque não podemos fazer a apresentação em português, vamos cambiar a inglês. So first of all, let me say a couple of words about the African Economic Outlook, which is the project I work on. And it's a project financed by the European Union and a group of ACP countries. Okay? It's a publication that comes annually, okay? And it has two main parts. It has a macroeconomic and economic outlook of the whole continent, okay? And then it deals with a specific subject of interest to African countries every year, okay? So the lead partner in this project is the African Development Bank. They became the lead partner a couple of years ago, although the project originated almost 10 years ago at the OECD Development Center, where I worked. The other partners are UNECA and the OECD, and a network of different think tanks all across the continent. Okay, this year we are also welcoming UNDP as one of the partners, and we're going to benefit from their presence across the country. So the outlook covers almost all African countries. I mean, there are only 3 exceptions. I mean, in this year we have increased the coverage from 47 to 50 countries, and we expect to cover 1 more next year, Zimbabwe, and probably 2. We will see. In any case, the relevance of the project, as it can be seen, I mean, it covers more than almost the entirety of the African GDP and a substantial amount of its population. I mean, also almost 100%. So, as I said before, the African Economic Outlook covers a different subject every year. Traditionally, we have been interested in areas on topics related to infrastructure. We have covered energy, transportation, water, sanitation, and so on. And this year, the topic has been domestic resource mobilization. There's been some references earlier on to the importance of taxation, the importance of governments to be able to benefit also from all this investment, from all these exports of natural resources in Africa. And this is the kind of issues that we have been dealing with this year. So for next year edition, and this is partially the reason why we are here today, we are going to work on Africa's emerging partners. And what this means is essentially the Chinese, Indian, and Brazilian presence across the continent. Okay. So first, let's give me a little overview of what the presentation, how the presentation is going to be structured. I will say a couple of words about the macroeconomic outlook, some of the conclusions that we have found out in this year's edition. Then I will sketch through the main drivers of growth for the past decade, and that we expect to be also the drivers of growth for the coming years in Africa. And then I will leave the floor to my colleague, Mr. Regis Savante, who will say a couple of things about the global crisis and Africa's resilience and some of the challenges and risks ahead for the continent, okay? So, as we can see in this chart, Africa has come out of a relatively sustained, relatively long period of growth, I mean, with rates above 6%, similar from what I understand to what Brazil has at the moment, or is expected to have in the coming couple of years. But this came to a sudden stop with the economic crisis. The continent as a whole went from a 6.5% more or less growth rate to a sudden stop to rates similar, close to 2.5% in most countries. Or outlook for the coming years is positive. I mean, we are also known in the field for being sort of Afro-optimistic, and this is our projection for the coming years. We expect this year a growth of 4.5% across the continent and growth of 5.2% for the next year if the current scenario of recovery in most developed countries is fulfilled. So. What has been different in this crisis, essentially, for Africa, is that Africa has come out, has gone into the crisis in a much more solid situation than in previous crises in the past. Okay, it has had, for instance, the resources to be able to lean against the wind, to engage into some sort of policies that have mitigated the negative effects of the crisis. This has been very different. And the international community has also learned a few lessons from previous crises and has been able to step in and provide enough financing to some of the countries that didn't have the resources. So these have been, in our view, two fundamental differences from this crisis and previous crises. Just as a fact, I mean, keep in mind, I mean, yes, Africa has been affected by the crisis. It has, as we can see in the chart, suffered quite a lot from this crisis. But it's worth remembering the fact that, for instance, 80% of African countries still managed to grow during the crisis, whereas if you take the group of OECD countries that we are representing here today, only 10% actually experienced positive growth in 2009. I mean, this is also something worth keeping in mind when analyzing opportunities for investment in Africa and so on. So let's have a little look at the evolution of the main partners or how have other emerging countries performed. So, in a way, I mean, quite similar to Africa. Brazil has been a little bit below, experiencing rates of growth a little bit below Africa, and India and China, I mean, as we know, I mean, have experienced a little bit more positive growth. This has been positive for Africa. As we can see, the negative effect of the crisis in Africa was lower than it was in China, in India, and especially in Brazil. And this is because of the reasons that I have been pointing out. But the engagement of the African continent in the world economy is something that has benefited it to some extent. So by regions, what we can see is that the south of the continent, essentially driven by South Africa, has been more affected by the crisis. The south and the west of the continent were more negatively affected, whereas the eastern part of the continent, with countries that are perhaps a little bit more isolated from the world economy, have done relatively better. I mean, the advantage for these countries is that perhaps they don't do exceptionally well when things are going okay in the world economy, but they also manage not to do that bad when the global demand shrinks. Okay, so oil exporting countries have obviously done a little bit better than oil importing countries. So our projections for the continent as a whole, these are, we expect the fastest growing countries to be, well, Angola, Ghana, Congo, Mozambique. As you can see, there's a number of Portuguese-speaking countries here. I mean, clearly Angola, a great, not only, well, trading partner, but more of a political, if you want, partner, okay, of Brazil. And, well, let's have a look at this slowest country. We expect the recovery to be slower in Namibia, Gabon, South Africa, Chad. And what are the drivers of this growth? Well, essentially the same ones that are going to allow these countries to recover. I mean, it's trade, as we can see on the left-hand side, and the evolution of world trade and African trade over the time, African trade being a little bit less volatile than world trade. And well, the evolution of commodities as well is going to be what we expect that is going to pull these African countries from out of the crisis. So I'll briefly, there are some factors that have been particularly negative for some countries, like oil, minerals, and the presence of political crises. This is always important to explain what countries have done relatively worse during these years of crisis. Okay, and as factors of resilience, I mean, we have identified in this year's edition the solid presence of an agricultural sector, a relatively diversified economy by African standards, and the presence of Chinese investments as positive factors, as resilience factors vis-a-vis the crisis. So on China's role, on China's presence in Africa, just briefly, as you can see from 1995, and the level of exports and imports of China with African countries have increased dramatically, right? And now, I'm sorry I have eaten some of your time, Regis, but I'm going to leave the floor to my colleague.